Start, and first item that we have on the agenda, or rather a call to order our regular session of City Council of August 29, 2017. The first item that we have after the call to order is the opening prayer and the pledges of allegiance to the flags of the United States and the state of Texas, and Councilmember Davis will lead us this evening. If you'll join me in standing, please.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for bestowing your blessings on those gathered here this evening. We ask for your wisdom as we work to fulfill the needs of our community. Guide us as we work through the conflicting interests and issues of our times, and grant us the ability to work together in harmony, even when there is honest disagreement. We also ask that you extend mercy to those in our neighboring communities who are suffering, and give strength and courage to the men and women serving their communities, neighbors, and friends to provide aid where it's desperately needed. In your name we pray, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Next item I have on the agenda this evening are city events and announcements, and we'll start with announcements of upcoming events.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a reminder that Monday, September 4th, city offices will be closed in observance of Labor Day. On Friday, September 8th, there is a ribbon cutting at 3009 Hair Lounge. That's at 4:30 p.m. at 2901 Ashley Oak Drive. Saturday, September 9th is Paws in the Pool. That's from noon to 4 at Pickerel Pool. And then on Sunday up at Windy Swan, we're doing Paws in the Pools again from noon to 4. Saturday, September 16th is the Schertz Q-Fest at Pickerel Park. Just to let you know, coming up, October 26th, a Thursday night, we're having the Steve Simonson Volunteer Appreciation Dinner at 6:30. That's in the Civic Center. The Skylight Balloon Fest is October 27th through 29th. And a few bits of election information. October 9th is the last day for submitting voter registration applications in time to vote in the November 7th, 2017 election, and the last day for requesting transfer of registration in time to vote in that election. And then also on October 23rd, that's the first day in which early voting begins, and information regarding early voting locations, times, and election day will be posted on the city's website.
Thank you, sir. Next item I have announcements and recognitions by the city manager. Mr. Kessel.
Mayor, Council, this afternoon about 1 o'clock I sent an update on our staff that is deployed currently in the Harvey relief efforts. I wanted to just let the audience know that we have 22 of our staff that's currently involved either 24/7 in the field, in various frontline capacities or in staging capacities, as well as providing relief in the evenings at the San Antonio EOC, the ARCC Center. We're doing quite a bit of good work. I had the opportunity to go down and visit with Collins Martin. He was the gentleman who's staging all of the vehicles. If you recall, he's down at the AT&T Center. He's got about 500 to 700 ambulances that he's tracking, along with about 1,200 other pieces of equipment out of one of the mobility operation centers. And he's been down there since the very beginning. He was actually called. He's one of 4 people, I think, in the area that had done this before with a similar event, and so he's leading that team. They track all the vehicles coming in. They stage through that center, pair them up with crews, and then they track them. They've got some really neat software that they put in place. So he's really doing some great things, as are the other 21 who are involved. I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to those folks who are lending a hand.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Next item I have on the agenda this evening, I have a proclamation. It's a proclamation recognizing National Payroll Week, easy for me to say. And I'm going to come down to the podium and read the proclamation, and Andrea Spanley-Jones is going to join me. So come on down. I tend to leave it. So, National Payroll Week. I have to be careful what I say. You know, there have been times in my career where my job has maybe not been the most fun or been tough at certain times. There was certain times with economic downturns, but you feel a lot better about it every 2 weeks or every month when you get paid for the work that you've done. So it is important work, and there's more to it than just putting out paychecks. So I'm going to go ahead and read this proclamation, if I may. And it reads, whereas the American Payroll Association and its more than 21,000 members have launched a nationwide public awareness campaign that pays tribute to the more than 15 million people who work in the United States and the payroll professionals who support the American system by paying wages, reporting worker earnings, and withholding federal employment taxes. And whereas payroll professionals in Schertz, Texas play a key role in maintaining the economic health of Schertz, performing such diverse tasks as paying into the unemployment insurance system, providing data for child support enforcement, and carrying out tax withholding, reporting, and depositing. And whereas payroll departments collectively spend more than $2.2 trillion annually complying with myriad federal and state wage and tax laws, and payroll professionals play an increasingly important role in ensuring the economic security of American families by helping to identify non-custodial parents and making sure they comply with their child support mandates. And whereas payroll professionals have become increasingly proactive in educating both the business community and the public at large about the payroll tax withholding systems. And whereas payroll professionals meet regularly with federal and state tax officials to discuss both improving compliance with government procedures and how compliance can be achieved at less cost to both government and businesses. Now, therefore, September 4th through 8th, 2017 has been proclaimed National Payroll Week. And I, Michael Carpenter, Mayor of Schertz, hereby give additional support to the efforts of the people working in San Antonio and Schertz metropolitan area in the payroll profession by proclaiming the first full week of September National Payroll Week. So first of all, thank you for joining us. And would you like a little shot at the microphone here,
Well,
please?
I just want to say how our organization appreciates the city's efforts to, point out and recognize our profession. This is actually my third year to be here and accept the proclamation. And as a resident of Schertz, I feel like I'm kind of, representing my town. So thank you very much.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
joining us, and this is for you.
Thank you.
We'll come back. All right, the next item that we have on the agenda this evening is hearing of residents, and this evening signed up to speak is Charlie Huff. Charlie. Welcome, and if you'll state your name and your address for the record when you get to the microphone. Oh, you want to do that? Okay, perfect.
My name is Charlie Huff. Everybody calls me Charlie except Mama. She called me Charles. Grew up in eastern Oklahoma, and when I was stationed at Randolph Air Force Base back in the 70s, I said when I left here, I'm coming back to this place. Because, of course, at that time, Schertz was a convenience store. You've come a long way, baby. I have been encouraged by some dear friends of mine to consider running for the school board in this town. And I've thrown my hat into that ring. It's hard to vote for somebody that you never heard of, you've never seen, so you folks can't claim that anymore because here I am in person. You're going to see some signs around the neighborhood over the next couple of months. I would like for you to consider voting for me based on what you can find out, what you can read. And if you'd like, you can call me, talk to me, text me, come to my office, call me and I'll come to yours and we'll talk about the problems that you may think we have here. I will tell you that our students who are graduating are one generation away from being in charge of some very important things that control the destiny of our country. I've been a teacher for 6 years. I was a football coach and a debate coach at the same school at the same time. That may be unique. And one of my football players went to the NFL, and one of my debaters is an attorney at law. So I didn't mess them up too much. Huff is a four-letter word. All the others were taken up. H-U-F-F, like huff and puff. When you see the sign, remember me. Read all you can about every candidate. Learn all you can about everyone, about their history, how long they've been around, and make your decision to vote accordingly. I appreciate you giving me a couple of minutes to say hello to you in your chamber. You're witnessing me losing my political virginity. I've never been here before. So I hope you'll remember me. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you, Charlie. All right, next item I have on the agenda this evening, we have a workshop and its discussion and possible action regarding procedures to follow when filling an unexpected vacancy for any positions reporting directly to the City Council. Mr. Crawford asked for this item to be on the agenda this evening, but did say that if the council wanted to take this up, that would be fine. If the council didn't want to take this up this evening, that would be okay with him too. So I'm going to just kind of ask the council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to, I'm sorry.
Mr. Crawford?
I'm sorry. I asked the mayor to present it to council. We've been through hiring the city prosecutor in the city. We're in the process of hiring the city.
Judge.
Municipal judge.
We hired the city judge. We're doing the prosecutor now. We learned a lot through that process. And if the council chooses to think we've learned enough and take the next, whatever cases come next, that's fine. We can pass on discussion. If they want to discuss something, I'm happy to have it discussed. I just didn't know how the council felt since we've been through two processes basically right now. That's all. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Mayor, I do believe that we need to at least explore this and try to figure out where we want to go when there's a vacancy available. That was a new thing for everyone on council besides yourself and myself. So I think it's pertinent that we sit down and discuss it, at least try to figure out a game plan going forward if we do have someone that we need to replace due to a untimely demise.
Okay. Do we feel like that's something we want to take up this evening? We want to have at a future all-day workshop that we have? What's the pleasure of council?
I felt like it would have been an all-day workshop item for one of our retreats, perhaps, simply because we discussed it in the back, and when we came out on the dais, I felt like it was something that we should probably put into a workshop form for us,
Okay.
and solidify it, and then bring it to the full council at that point, and kind of vote on it here on the dais.
Okay. Mr. Thompson?
I think it's, excuse me, a viable topic to pursue, but I believe the best venue might be the workshop just because of the give and take conversation that we're able to have there.
I leave it to the pleasure of the council. All good? All right, then we'll ask that we include that in our next all-day workshop. The next item that we have on the agenda this evening is discussion and possible action regarding the official naming of the so-called no-name park. Mr. Van Zant.
Yes, sir.
How are you this evening?
I'm fine.
Good.
Council.
Good.
To see you. I'm going to ask for your indulgence for just a moment because I'm going to see if I can figure out how to do this. Oh, James is going to help, I think. Laptop, and then we're supposed to pull that out, wiggle that. And that's me. So, this is just wonderful stuff. Technology is wonderful. So this evening we're here to talk about something that came from council. We took it to the Parks Advisory Board, and here's kind of what happened. No-name park background. We knew you guys would be interested in that. No-name park is a parcel of land located adjacent to the southbound side of the Schertz Parkway between the Ashley Place and Jonas Wood subdivisions. It's approximately 1 acre in size and has no vehicular access. It was not until a few years ago that the city became aware that the land had been deeded to the city, and at that time, it began to be referred to as no-name park. We dubbed it that for lack of a better term. Staff will be working in the next fiscal year to install exercise stations in the park, given the heavy use of the hike and bike trail along the Schertz Parkway by joggers and walkers. Staff feels that the exercise stations would be well used. On June 13th, City Council discussed the naming of the park and requested that the item be taken to the Parks Advisory Board and that the board consider the park to be named Earl Sawyer Park. Although the City Council has the authority to name the park, The mayor and council felt that it was important that the item go before the advisory board to follow the process and then be returned to council with a recommendation. On July 24th, the naming of No Name Park was discussed by the Parks Advisory Board. Parks Advisory Board park naming policy speaks to geographical location, like Rhine Valley or Ashley Park, key ecological features like Crescent Bend Nature Park or Heritage Oaks Park, or a person non-living who contributed significantly to the acquisition of or development of the park, like Wendy Swan Memorial Park. The board discussed the option of naming the park after Mayor Sawyer and considered other names as well. In each case, the board could not come to a consensus on a name that would be a good fit. The outcome. The board did not feel that naming a small parcel of land after Earl Sawyer was commiserate with his involvement with the vision, design, and construction of the Schertz Parkway. Instead, the board felt like it might be more appropriate to rename Schertz Parkway as Earl Sawyer Parkway, understanding that this move would necessitate many changes that might make this recommendation difficult, if not impossible, to execute. They also did not recall Mayor Sawyer having a lot of involvement in the parks area by like the way Wendy Swan did, as an example. So after considerable deliberation, Parks Advisory Board members unanimously voted to keep the dubbed name of the park as No Name Park. Now, discussion.
Well, I had asked the council to consider asking the Parks Board to consider
Yes, sir.
the name, and I will say this: in very few cases is it, in my personal opinion, the right thing for the city council to fail to heed the recommendations of one of its citizen-led boards, committees, or commissions. We've disagreed with planning and zoning over the years, a time here and a time there, and with the Economic Development Corporation, their budget, a time here and a time there. But it would please me to no end to take and heed the advice of that citizen group and go forth as they've recommended, unless the council has any other idea about how we should proceed. Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Mayor, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you say to rename Schertz Parkway Earl Sawyer Parkway?
That's correct.
That was, but their recommendation.
No, that was their recommendation as something that would be more appropriate.
Yeah, the only thing that they voted on was
the
keeping the
No
name
Name
of
Park.
No Name Park as it's been dubbed as officially No Name Park.
Yes.
I don't agree with that portion of it, simply because I think it should have a name to it. It should have some type of identity in our city. Naming it No Name Park is simply not the way to go. I think we need to put some type of name on it. I would ask that you would, if the council would indulge, would go back and ask them to relook at that. I'm quite sure there's someone fitting that we could name that park after. Even if Steve Simonson, there's always something we can do there.
Sure.
Schertz Parkway will not be renamed, not as long as I'm on the dice. So if I have anything to do with that. I do think that we can find an appropriate person to name that park after, though.
Very good. Mr. Thompson?
Or geological feature, you're right.
Have we thought about opening this up to the citizens of Schertz on a website and asking them to throw their names, in, not the individual residents, but to throw names into the hat?
We took it to the advisory board first. That could be something we could definitely consider going forward.
Because we have residents that are very creative. Something might come up that just everybody goes, wish I'd have thought of that.
Yes, sir. We can do that.
Mr. Larson?
Well, I'm thankful that I got here just in time because I think that this is very fun. And the reason I think it's fun and the reason I love it so much is because when we voted to send it back to the board, honestly, I thought this is pro forma. This is just a formalized process. And I love that that wasn't the case. I love that they had their own ideas, that they had their own internal debate. I don't know if I agree with what they came up with, but I don't know. I love that there's that kind of involvement in the community. So anyways, it just got me really excited to be here just in time for that because that is not what I was expecting. And in that nature, because I think it celebrates the independence of our boards and our advisory committee, because I think it shows the involvement of Schertz citizens, for me, I don't agree with what they've decided, but I will vote to support it because I think it's really fun that they're doing their role. So that's where I stand.
Thank you.
Others? Mr. Davis?
Yeah.
Gotta have an opinion on this one, having written the parks plan.
I do have an opinion on it. Having sat through many of those meetings where we argued and discussed naming of parks and the pros and cons of naming them after people and what kind of issues that could sometimes lead to.
Yes, sir.
And arguing over local geological features or plants.
We did that as well.
I wish I could have been a part of the conversation.
Yes, sir.
I don't think it's a bad idea to maybe have some kind of contest or get some other public input if they're stalemated on this. In this particular case, and again, this was one that dropped into our lap after I wrote the Parks Master Plan. I mean, so it's not even in the Parks Master Plan, the last one that was approved.
That's correct.
There's a lot of options out there. I mean, just rattling through my brain, I thought maybe you can call it Central Park because it's about dead center in the geographic area of the city, darn near. But I think there's got to be a lot of other alternatives out there other than No Name Park. That's just my personal take on it. So, I mean, I'd be up for sending it back to the Parks Board to let them take another swipe at it, or even, approach them with the option of doing a city contest to see if we can get some other ideas out of this.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Mr. Larson, please.
I've had time to gestate on it, and I don't think I'm going to get consensus of council, but I have to say, I think I love No Name Park. And the reason is it fits the history of the park. I think it's ridiculous that the city had a park that we had no idea we had. In a fun way, not in a bad way, not saying anything negative about anybody. And so the history of the park, I think it's a fun name. People are like, No Name Park, and then learn the history of, hey, we had this park, and there was this dispute over who's in charge of it, and people weren't maintaining it, and everyone's pointing fingers, and finally we're like, oh, well, it's a park, and we didn't even know we had it. So anyways, that's where I stand.
Mr. Crawford, please.
When you first said No Name Park, keep that, that fit. I mean, we don't know much about it. It has no access for vehicles. It has only street access or sidewalk access, basically,
Yes, sir.
which is not commensurate with somebody like a former mayor. So I'm trying to figure out how I want to value that little park. No Name fits right now, but I don't know. Mark has more experience on valuing things like that and putting names to them. Having residents come up with a name is fine. Keeping No Name is fine. I have, because it got that name because we didn't have a name. We didn't know we owned it. So whatever, I'm sort of willing to do anything, but keeping No Name is fine also. So I'm kind of being wishy-washy about it. But when you said No Name, I said, that's a nice chuckle. Y'all agreed with it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Edwards?
I'm not going to debate this all night, I promise you that. But my wife went and bought a puppy, and one of my clients came to the office, and my wife saw their puppy, and she went out and she bought a puppy. By the time I got home, my wife brought the puppy to the office. I saw the puppy. I said, what are you going to name it? She says, I have no idea. 6 hours later, I got home. My wife said, I picked a name. The dog's name is Sadie. So, oh, that's interesting. Now, if my wife would have told me that she was going to keep that puppy's name, whatever, for another 10 years, probably wouldn't have sat very well with me in my home. I think that we owe it to the citizens to give it a proper name, and No Name is not a proper name for that particular location. And just because we didn't know we owned it, it doesn't negate us from our responsibility to take that responsibility of naming it now.
Dr. Kaiser?
I'll keep it brief. I have to agree with Mr. Edwards. It's good for a chuckle right here, but long-term, to have a park named No Name Park, I don't see it. I would agree with Mr. Thompson as well. I think to get some residents' input and have the board come up with something, I think I think you can do it. Something better than no name.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is Mr. Gutierrez?
Yes, I better have my
Please.
2 cents here. You know, it is a chuckle. I mean, when I heard the name No Name Park, I said, what name? And our Parks and Rec Committee could not come out with a name, so it stayed No Name Park. And I do agree that, you know, no name might not be appropriate for it, and it does add a chuckle to it. And it gives the city a sense of humor too. So I kind of like it either way. So if we do have a contest, I like to see what other options are available.
First of all, I look forward to a split vote. And second of all, this is one of those little times when it's a blessing not to have a vote unless there's a tie. And if you all create a tie, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, it's interesting. I'm split on this at this point. I think that Dr. Kaiser and Mr. Edwards make a great point that it's a bit, you know, really no name. But I think there's merit to the other comments as well. It's a bit of a frolic. It's a bit of saying, man, we don't take ourselves too seriously. And I guess the overriding factor for me is if that is the consensus of a citizen board, and I like you, I thought they would come back and say, great idea, rubber stamp, and they said no. I think maybe even just out of respect for that, we ought to do it. But that's my last thought, and without spending more time on it, I'll ask if there's a motion to take some action.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the Parks Board's recommendation of retaining the name of No Name Park.
Mr. Thompson?
If possible, like Mr. Larson, to amend that, that we accept that motion after our citizenry has had a 30-day chance to respond and the BARC has had a chance to reconsider those comments.
Make me understand. So you're saying make a motion to accept the park's recommendation of No Name Park after, well, I'll rescind my motion and let Mr. Thompson make a motion.
All right, the floor is cleared.
Thank you, Scott, Mr. Larson. I'd like to move that we ask our park board to open up a 30-day window on the website, social media, have a contest with the appropriate criteria promoted on the website, and see what happens.
If you make it a 60-day, I'll grant you your motion, your second.
Amend that to 60-day.
Second.
I have a motion and amended and a second, although I must tell you that it would be quite humorous if the council failed to cast any votes at this point and just kind of followed along with the actions of the Parks Board. But I do have a motion and a second, and I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Could I do a half an eye and let you break the tie?
No, but if you were not to cast a vote and were not present on the dais at the time that it came around and it was a 3-3 tie, I would be compelled to vote.
Aye.
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 Nay.
Aye.
I have 6 ayes and 1 nays. I did get my split vote, and so we will wait 60 days and ask the Parks Board if they would kindly ask the public for input and see if something comes up that the Parks Board and the council like, and if not, then we may find ourselves right back here.
Yes, sir.
All right,
We
very
may.
good.
Thank you.
Mr. Van Zant, council, thank you. With the council's indulgence, we have a guest with us this evening, and so I'd like to skip to item number 8, which is Resolution 17R74, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing a program and expenditures as provided for in the Economic Development Performance Agreement between the City of Schertz Economic Development Corporation and A Smart Restaurant Supply Company and other matters in connection therewith.
Good morning, Mayor and Council, or good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Wanted to recognize we have Mr. Vetter here with us, who has moved up, who represents A Smart Restaurant Supply Company. On August 24th, at the regular Schertz Economic Development Corporation meeting, they approved an agreement and made a recommendation to seek the council's approval for authorizations of funds in connection with an economic development incentive agreement. Now, one of the things before I go into the details of the agreement, as you remember from our economic development policy that we recently created, this is an incentive that will come 100% by the Economic Development Corporation and by those funds. So these are not general fund dollars that would be associated with this economic development incentive. They are from the Economic Development Corporation. So A Smart Restaurant Supply Company is based in San Antonio. This is a company that has provides supplies to the restaurant industry throughout Texas. They have 17 locations across the state, including several in Houston, some of which were affected by the recent storms, and appreciate Mr. Vedder's time as we are trying to finalize this deal as he has had to work very hard with bringing those stores back online and dealing with the damage. Under the proposal, A Smart would locate their warehouse and distribution facilities to a facility located at 9850 Dewar Lane. This is the 215,000 square foot facility that was built speculatively, which is perfect for A Smart. Under the proposed incentive agreement, A Smart would receive an operations grant as soon as they started operations at the facility that would be worth $225,000. Additionally, for a period of 6 years, they could receive an annual grant that would be equal to a portion of the personal property taxes that were received by the city of Schertz. And then lastly, in the 6th year, they could have the option or the ability to receive a grant by purchasing the facility. This would ensure that A Smart maintained a long-term company here in the city of Schertz. Under the agreement, they would maintain a minimum of 40 employees with just over $1.1 million in annual payroll. Key is that they will have $5.6 million of personal property at the facility, and that number will grow by 7% each year throughout the term of the agreement, so for those 6 years. Lastly, because of the changing industry, one of the things that A Smart has a growing area is in their online sales, and so they will have $8 million worth of locally sourced sales tax that will be attributed to that facility. In total, the agreement would be worth approximately $400,000, of which the city of Schertz would collect $1.7 million. This is an agreement that was recommended by the Economic Development Board at their meeting, and they seek approval and approval by the City Council for authorizations of funds. Any questions?
Very good. Questions for Kyle? Mr. Edwards?
I have several questions, Kyle. I looked at this item. So I want to make sure I have this right. We have $5.6 million growing at 7% in personal property. We're going to collect $1.3 million per year over the 6 years for the sales tax. $400,000 is the incentive package. So what are the future incentive amounts on the grants?
So,
or are you estimating that?
As far as the future annual grants, they are an estimated number based on their personal property that they will have at the facility. The annual grants do not take into account the real property that is already there. So it just looks at the personal property.
Okay, so the online sales, you're expected to be close to $8 million?
Per year.
Per year. Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
I'd just like to move that we adopt ordinance resolution number 17-R-74. I think it's
Second.
an excellent agreement.
I have a motion from Mr. Thompson, a second from Dr. Kaiser. Mr. Crawford?
I have a question. Out of the sales tax, the number you gave for sales tax is all the sales tax that they collect.
So it would be sales tax
It's not-
that are
it's not a
local,
revenue
that
number.
are sourced from that facility.
Okay.
Correct.
So we know it's an after revenue, whatever revenue, because not all revenue is taxable by sales tax in some cases. so we know we're dealing with a sales tax number.
Correct.
Okay.
Anyone else?
And can I
Sorry,
ask
go ahead.
a definitional question of, in this case, what an operational grant is? I know what a grant is, I just want to know what it's being used for. And I understand they have an option to do a second grant if they purchase the building.
Correct. So the operations grant is a front-loaded incentive that A-Smart would have the ability to receive once the company has received their certificate of occupancy. So we know that they've gone through the city's permitting process and that they have the ability to start operations. So it comes at that point. It is before they've moved in the employees. It's before they've moved in the personal property to the facility.
It's a non-specified use kind of a grant,
Correct.
as a grant.
They have the ability to use it in connection with their operations of locating at the facility.
No disrespect to A-Smart whatsoever in my following question. In the past, since 5 of us are kind of new, 8 months or 9 months in council, in the past we've had meetings, executive session meetings, to discuss these events. I know that's not necessarily required, but it is kind of nice where we can hash out in a more comfortable manner, maybe, under a little bit less pressure, so to speak, because it's the 29th of August, and they want this approved so they can sign a lease per the agreement to I guess, lease the building, maybe lease purchase, on Friday. And that's kind of a short timeline for us to think about. It's not a big deal. I just hope that in the future we can have a little bit more time to consider and ask you questions instead of having to do it from sitting right here, kind of on a short notice thing. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Edwards?
And I think, Mr. Crawford, you have a great point. However, this is being funded with economic development dollars and not dollars from the council. So
Thank you.
just want to let you know on that. I do have one other question. The amount of the grant for purchase, that's going to be a future determined amount?
So it is a set amount of $60,000, $62,000. Let me confirm that number.
I think it's 68.
$68,000.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from council? I do have a motion from Mr. Thompson, a second from Dr. Kaiser. I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
7 ayes and no nays now that the council's voted. I'm a huge fan of A-Smart. I got a ton of your stuff in my kitchen, and if I come home with an A-Smart bag now, my wife gets mad at me and I get in trouble because I'm there all the time. So thrilled to have you here in the city. I'm very, very, very glad to have you join us. Absolutely happy to recognize you. Please come on up and
Mr. Mayor, council members, it's refreshing, first let me just say, to come to a meeting like this to compared to a lot of the other council meetings and county meetings that I have to attend to sometimes. And so far, the most important thing that y'all have had to discuss is naming a park. And so that was enjoyable to listen to, and good luck to y'all. Let me just say, A-Smart is thrilled to be looking forward to being a corporate citizen here in the community of Schertz. We've had our eyes on this area for a long time, just like a lot of other big corporate names, bigger than ours even, but so that you'll know who you're getting. We're the largest equipment and supply dealer to the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry in Texas. And we're one of the largest in the country, and we're just in Texas in terms of our physical plants, our stores and such. We do sell out of the state as well. Our corporate office is only 9 miles away on Austin Highway near Parambital, you know where that intersection is.
my favorite store.
Yeah, and it's a dangerous store to go into sometimes if you're a foodie. But any of you, if you want to come visit our store, and Kyle can let you know how to get in touch with me, I'll be pleased to show you around. And I don't know a lot about the pots and pans part of the business. My part's more with the real estate and other related subjects there. But this facility meets so many needs that we've been planning on for the last 10 years. And this location also meets the needs of our growth and things. We're actually consolidating operations from a couple of other companies that we own, that are going to be brought there as well. So, I mean, we just see a lot of growth in the next few years, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be generating some healthy tax revenue for you guys too. But we're just really thrilled to be here, and I thank you for your approval on this motion.
Indeed. Very happy to have you here with us in the city of Schertz.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back to the regular order of business on the agenda and start with the consent agenda items. Item number 1, minutes, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of August 22nd, 2017. Item number 2, approval of the appointment of Ms. Rosalind Wise as regular member to the Historical Preservation Committee. Item number 3, an ordinance 17D28, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, providing that the Code of Ordinances of the City of Schertz, Texas be amended by revising Chapter 86, Article 5, Section 86-149, parking prohibited, and providing an effective date. Any of these that need to be considered individually? If not, is there a motion to approve the items on consent?
So move.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Thompson, a second from Mr. Edwards. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays, the motion carries. First discussion item that we have this evening is also a public hearing, and we have the public hearing on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2017 and 2018. Along with that, there is an ordinance, which is Ordinance 17T30, an ordinance adopting a budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2017, and ending September 30, 2018, in accordance with the charter of the City of Schertz, Texas, providing for the filing of the budget, providing that this ordinance shall be cumulative of all ordinances, providing a severability clause, and providing an effective date. Long caption. Mr. Walters.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I saw some new faces in the audience tonight, so I will go through the presentation that we looked at last time. There has been no changes to the budget in this process. So the budget highlights that have been proposed to City Council for 2017-18 include the third year of the recommended action on the classification and compensation study. So that's year 3 of 4 of targeted pay adjustments. The opening of Fire Station number 3 includes 22 new personnel, includes the purchase and installation of new permit software, includes some deferred park maintenance, includes a new Schertz spin event, includes some additional vehicle and equipment replacements, includes putting in some redundant water lines to transport water to the southern area of Schertz, includes relocating utilities on FM 1103 for the tech stop project going on over there, and includes some additional drainage channel maintenance. On the new personnel, it includes 4 crossing guards, 2 patrol officers, a plans examiner, a code enforcement officer, the final 6 firefighters we need to open station number 3, 3 EMT positions, 3 water and sewer servicemen, and then 2 drainage workers. So in November, the city conducted its first ever citizens satisfaction survey citywide. The results of that, citizens said we have 4 areas that should receive the most emphasis over the next few years. They were police services, parks and trails, stormwater runoff, and enforcement of codes and ordinances. To address those citizen concerns, we do have 2 patrol officers for the police services. For parks, we have a new trail from a grant program, as well as a focus on park facility maintenance, the deferred program you saw on the other slide. On the stormwater runoff, we do have $1.3 million of drainage channel maintenance planned, as well as adding 2 additional drainage workers. And in the enforcement of city codes and ordinances, we do have we are proposing a new code enforcement officer to help address those concerns. Staff also conducted 3 community budget presentations held on August 10th, 16th, and 17th at the Schertz United Methodist Church, at Corbett Junior High, and at the North Community Center. Some of the responses and feedback we have that the presentations were very informative from the citizens. One common theme from a couple of the events was more spending on parks personnel and park upgrades in the southern and northern areas, specifically in Schertz, on the extremes. That the 15-18 improvements could not come fast enough for the school district, other drainage issues, and current traffic as development continues. Street improvements are a priority, and then there are additional police on patrol. We had about, I think, average of 10 citizens at each of the events, so we managed to bring about 30 citizens to different citizens. The all funds expense budget as proposed to council is $76.5 million. 41% is the general fund, 29% is the water and sewer fund, EMS is 12%, INS is 9%, and the miscellaneous special use funds make up the remainder. So with the all funds budget of $76.5 million, overall the city is recommending a net reduction in our fund balance of about $319,000, leaving an overall fund balance of $48.2 million. The majority of those that funds are restricted to very specific uses. General fund in particular, which has more allows for more variety of uses. The budget's 31.3. We're recommending $1.4 million taken out of our fund balance and leaving $9.8 million in there. Same for the INS fund. I remove about $487, leaving about $1 million there. Drainage fund, we're doing $1.3 million of drainage channel improvements. It's funded from the fund balance that we've been building up since the last fee increase, and now we've grown to a point where we can actually get out there and make some improvements. The PEG fund for the master communication plan and then the parks and tree mitigation for our project fund. So we build that amount up and then we spin it back down. This slide shows the history of the general fund budgets, final adopted budgets, starting in 2007 through 2018. You saw actually for the first few years of the recession, we did actually grow the overall general fund budget before it kind of leveled off and then started back with the trend that we saw right before the recession. Focusing on the general fund, the revenues are proposed at $31.3 million. We're estimating this to be the case next year. Property taxes are 38% of our revenue in the general fund. Sales taxes are 24%. Fees and franchise fees are about 7% each. And then this year, the fund transfers are 14%. So we're funding our budget with a transfer from fund balance of about $1.4 million. So that area is higher than you would see in other years. Under the expense budget that's been proposed to council, $31.3 million, 22% going to the general government, internal service, IT, finance, HR, buildings, fleet, about 18%, police, 24%, fire rescue, 15%, then parks, library, health services, marshal is in the final 24%. So the general fund, we're actually anticipating receiving about $29.8 million from taxes, fees, and other service contracts. The expense budget we proposed was $31.3 million. So the budget is balanced by taking $1.4 million from our reserves, our fund balance, to fund our operations this year. The ending fund balance will be about $9.8 million. And if we have a 26% reserve requirement of 26% of our annual operating expenditures, we would be only required to hold $8 million in there. So even after the reduction, we'll still have $1.8 million over the minimum requirement. So focusing on that, the proposed budget does assume a 26% fund balance requirement, and choices made in this budget is expected to reduce the fund balance to 26% by fiscal year 2022. To do so, this budget front loads a bunch of expenditures to catch up on some deferred hiring and maintenance. Instead of waiting and doing those hires and maintenance over a few years, we can use that money that's been accumulated in our reserves and get them done now as we spend down to the 26% requirement. So in a 5-year forecast, this is what it'll look like. On the next to bottom line, that's our reserve funding. If it's white, it means we're putting money into reserves. Red, it means we're taking money out. So in 2018, we're proposed to take $1.4 million out of reserves. 2019, about $720,000 is forecasted. In 2020, $584 is forecasted. In 21 and 22, we start putting money back. The fund balance percentage, right now we're anticipating to end the year about 39.5%. Even after taking $1.4 million out, we'll have 31.8%. And then it gradually decreases to 26% even by 2022. We're trying to space that reduction out over multiple years to prevent front-loading it and then an emergency or a recession or something, hurricane happens, and then we're forced to go down below that 26%. So this gives us time to react in case one of those events happen. Moving to the Water and Sewer Fund, a contribution to Schertz Local Government Corporation will increase about $520,000 for the additional debt service for the construction of the second pipeline from the treatment plant to Schertz. Waste contractor fees, these are the solid waste or our garbage, will increase 3% plus new population, so you'll see the line in the budget increase about $432,000. And that's the that's the cost to the city, on the city to provide those services. Sewer treatment cost, again, on the city, will increase 7%, plus new population, estimated about 325,000. And then we'll have some capital replacement, about 387,000, including a sewer service truck, a truck with a bed crane, and a couple of regular service trucks. We will be proposing debt service out of the water and sewer fund next year to include the 2 water loop lines out south for continuous service. Right now, we just have one kind of distribution main from our central hub down to the residents in southern Schertz. If that main breaks, then everyone in the southern area then will lose water service until that main's repaired. By having a second line or a redundant line, it makes a continuous system, so if one goes down, the other line can still provide water. Tank painting at the Nacogdoches and Live Oak water towers. Those are a past due item. We need to go ahead and get this done every so often, and we're a little bit behind on that. And then 1103 utility relocations is included for the debt service. To move our lines out of the way for TxDOT to construct the widening of 1103. Also includes a 3-man crew and vehicle, valued about $174,000, and then contract hydrant testing about $45,000. And currently, the city has about 1,600 hydrants in the city that should be tested annually. On the EMS fund, it includes hiring 3 EMTs at a net of $90,000. Includes changing a billing clerk to a billing specialist, about $11,000, and includes merit and class and comp adjustments, estimated about $200,000. And the reason that's sectioned off here is there are other departments receiving that adjustment. Just when you're looking at this solely by itself, it kind of stands out, so I want to bring it to your attention. On the drainage fund, it does include 2 drainage workers. It does include drainage channel maintenance, including concrete work, about $416,000, and desilting project, about $538,000, as well as an underground drainage channel putting in at Hidden Grove, about $136,000. Also includes about $484,000 for the Lower Seguin Bridge. We set the contract price for that last week. This is the maximum amount, even if they find something else and need a change order, we still have this in there. And the final price on the city will be offset by Cibolo by 50%, which could be up to about $242,000, depending on the final cost of the project. And with that, I go to council.
Thank you, sir. This is on for public hearing, so what I'll do in just a moment is I'll open up the public hearing. If you do decide that you would like to address the council during this time, just come forth and state your name and your address for the record so the city secretary can capture that. We ask you to keep comments to around 3 minutes, but a little leeway given to me from the chair. If we need to go a little longer, we certainly can. We want to give everybody a chance to be heard. So this time I will open the public hearing and invite anyone that would like to address the council on this item to do so at this time. Does not appear that I have any takers. So at this time, I'll close the public hearing, and we will move on to discussion by council. Council, as Mr. Walters reported, there's no changes to the proposed budget. Any questions for him at this time? Well, Mr. Walters.
I would like to point out the 4 crossing guards I mentioned earlier were the ones that council was asked to authorize last week. It's not additional 4. So it's the same 4, but we're asking to bring them on earlier since the school year is starting before our fiscal year does. So it's the same number.
Indeed. All right, any questions for Mr. Walters? If not, is there a motion to approve Ordinance 17T30?
So we'll move.
I've got a motion from Mr. Thompson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Crawford. Hit my right ear first where I have a little bit less hearing loss. No, it's where I have more hearing loss. I don't know where they're coming or going. Anyway, I have a motion and a second. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 7 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening is item number 5, a public hearing on a proposed tax rate and consideration and or action approving an ordinance, Ordinance 17T31, an ordinance approving the appraisal roll, setting the tax rate, levying and assessing general and special ad valorem taxes for the use and support of the municipal government of the city of Schertz, Texas, apportioning the levies for specific purposes, providing a severability clause, and providing an effective date. Mr. Walters.
The certified tax rolls came in as total taxable value for the city of Schertz at $3.37 million. This was an increase of about $101 million from the adjusted taxable property in 2016, and $84 million of that was new development or new construction value. For the property taxes, this is the breakup of the overall property tax bill received by a citizen broken out by county. The green portion there on the bottom is actually the city of Schertz. So out of all the property taxes that go on homes and businesses, about 20% is actually the city. The largest portion is the school district. Counties in red right there, along with the black, the county road. And if you live in Bexar County, there's also a couple of additional taxing jurisdictions, including the college, the University Health System, and the San Antonio River Authority. So city staff receives those certified values from the appraiser by July 25th every year as mandated by the state. The state then mandates the calculation of two rates, the first one being the effective rate and the second one being the rollback rate. The effective rate is the rate at which, on average, keeps the tax bill the same in the year prior. It raises the same amount of taxes as we raised the year before, basically. So if we had no new development, no houses built, no new commercial property, if you went with the effective rate, the city would raise the exact same amount of property taxes that it did the year prior. The rollback rate is the highest rate council can adopt under its sole authority. Council could adopt a rate higher than that, but if they do, citizens can petition and hold an election. If it passes, the rate will be reduced back to the rollback rate. So, and then we have the current rate, and then the proposed maximum on the next slide, which council set on August 8th and can no longer go over without reissuing the public notices and reholding public hearings. So the effective rate for 2017 was $49.10. The rollback rate was calculated at $50.83. The current rate is $49.11, and the proposed maximum rate the council set was $49.10, and staff has submitted a budget that's balanced at the $49.10. This is the last night council could change the proposed maximum rate to account for all the notice requirements and public hearing requirements without calling for another special council meeting. There's information. 1 penny on the tax rate equals about $336,000 of revenue, or $21.18 on the average home. And the difference between the current rate and the proposed maximum is about $3,300 in revenue for the city. So the city does have two separate tax rates. The first one is the M&O, or maintenance and operations. All the money raised by that portion of the tax rate goes to fund the general fund operations. And then they have the second rate was the INS, or interest and sinking. So all the funds raised from the INS rate go to pay the general fund's debt obligations, or annual debt payments. So the M&O rate is proposed going from $31.68 to $32.48, so an increase on the M&O for day-to-day operations, while the INS rate is proposed to go from $17.43 to $16.62, a slight decrease. Overall, the overall rate does decrease from $49.11 to $49.10. The anticipated annual impact on the average home owner in the city of Schertz is about $35 at the $49.10 rate. The 2016 tax bill at the $49.11 on the average home value was about $1,005. 2017 was about $1,040. So the $35 increase with the effective rate is due to a lower commercial values we saw. There's been some business with higher inventory. They held on the roll for 1 year, and that has been as such decreased, as well as we saw some other commercial values as the personal property ages. It's valued at a lower and lower amount each year, just like when you drive a new car off the lot. It starts off $20,000, and you're lucky it's at $10,000 5-10 years later. Same thing happens to all the machinery and equipment we get taxed inside the commercial properties. So this year we just saw that the values did decrease, which is a normal thing that happens over time, and then we didn't have any new big commercial properties come in to add a lot of personal property, and then the current existing companies did not replace a bunch of their aging equipment, which would increase the tax roll. And then we also saw some higher residential exemptions seen on our certified tax rolls this year that would kind of explain the increase, even though we're going with the effective rate. Historically, in 2006, the M&O tax rate was at $33.45. In 2017, the rate is $32.48, so we're not quite as high as we were in 2006. In 2007, a couple of different things happened. one, we started going into the recession, and two, we issued a bunch of bonds on a voter-approved bond election. And so, to try to help the citizens out, overall, the staff and council recommended a lower rate on the M&O side to make up for the high INS rate. We were able to hold that for a while, but then we started increasing it back to the rates we've seen prior to 2006, or prior to 2007. On the INS, or interest in sinking, back in 2006, we only had about a 9-cent tax rate. In 2017, that is now $16.62. The majority of the increase first came in 2007. We issued a bunch of debt obligations related to a voter-approved bond election in 2007 that increased it almost 6%, or 6 cents. We managed to hold it at 15 cents for about 5 years, or during that time. We did so by taking money out of the INS bank account. We had excess money sitting in there in the INS fund, and we used that money to keep that rate low, use that money we had in the bank account to actually help make the payments. By doing so, we were able to have a lower rate than what we normally would have if we didn't have money in the bank account. We were able to do that for 5 years, and in 2011, 12, 13, another thing happened, or two things. The first one was we had another bond election in 2010, and then the money that we were taking from our bank account on the INS to help keep that rate low ran out. So in a 2-year period, we saw about a 5-cent increase again for the new bonds. Since then, we've been trying to time and plan our debt issuances in a manner more consistent with our overall property value growth. And doing so, we're able to lower that rate back down to $16.62. In 2015, we did hold another bond election. And we've issued about 75% of that money, as well as additional CO bonds for streets and road improvements over the past few years. And instead of having to raise our tax rate in the INS fund, we've been able to keep it the same or actually reduce it, which is what we're trying to do with that planning on the debt side of when we issue and how much. Hopefully that'll help minimize that big fluctuation or swing in the tax rate going forward as best we can. When you stack the two on top of one another, you'll see the M&O on the bottom has really been quite consistent over the year, even though we did drop it in 2007, while the INS has slowly grown over time, which is a common practice for growing cities that needs additional infrastructure. So we're planning to hold two public hearings on the tax rate. The first one was August 22nd, last week. Tonight is the second public hearing for August 29th. Overall budget calendar, this will be the first vote and the last public hearing. September 5th, we're planning to hold the second vote and final adoption of both the tax rate and the budget. And so October 1st, those ordinances will go into effect. That's all I have.
All right, very good. Thank you, sir. This is also set for public hearing, so same request as before. If you come forward, if you'd state your name and your address for the record, and again, comments around the 3-minute mark. So at this time, I will open the public hearing and invite anyone that would like to address the council to come forward and do so at this time. It appears that I don't have any takers. So I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time and open it up to council for questions. Mr. Walters, I don't think there were any changes made from the last presentation. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Walters at this time? If not, is there a motion to approve ordinance 17T31?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion for Mr. Davis, a second for Mr. Edwards. Any other comments or questions from council? I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Walters. Next item on the agenda this evening, it's yours as well. Very good. I'll slow down long enough for you to get a drink of water. Ordinance 17M34, an ordinance authorizing the amendment of GASB 54 fund balance standards, applications, and policy of the city of Schertz and related matters in connection therewith. Mr. Walters.
Even again, on this item, I mentioned this in the budget presentation, that the budget was contingent on a new fund balance policy requiring a 26% fund balance requirement and had other stipulations in it that we also discussed during the last retreat in July. The original ordinance came out of the GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Right after the recession, a bunch of cities across the United States and Canada started running low on their fund balances, and then during the long protracted recession. So with that, they recommended, or actually required all cities in the United States to set a minimum fund balance and then a ordinance detailing the different types of fund balances and what they're used for to try to promote additional transparency and to make cities more prepared in case there is a recession or a downturn. And that original ordinance you saw you referenced was the city's first fund balance policy and ordinance attached to that. This will be the first time the city has updated the policy since we first initiated it. So a little bit more background, different types of fund balances. We actually have 5 different types as prescribed by the GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. The first one is non-spendable. So we actually have an item in there for non-spendable. It's usually unused inventory or prepaid expense. So it's technically a fund balance item. It's not necessarily a liability. The city doesn't owe anybody anything for it, but it's more of a physical item and then can't really be used for anything else. It's either already expense has already been paid, or it's a physical item that we can't just pick up and use to go hire somebody or buy a new piece of equipment, at least not easily. The second type is a restricted fund balance. So all the monies that come in from a restricted source or have a restricted tag on it, like the hotel occupancy tax, the state restricts us on how that money can be spent, goes into a restricted fund balance. The third is a committed fund balance. This is funds to be used only for a specific purpose, kind of like the restricted funds, but unlike them, council is the one that would be setting the restrictions on the use of that fund balance. Right now we have one such use after we call it the seed fund. After CPS got rid of its own little seed fund that it was building up for different citizens, council at the time decided to set aside the additional money that CPS was giving to the cities in a separate fund to operate under the same rules. This one's a little bit more lenient than the restricted because council, being the authority that's setting and restricting the use of funds, can then be the governing body to remove that restriction and allocate it for another purpose. So unlike the restricted funds, council has authority to actually change the use and through official action for those funds. The fourth is an assigned fund balance to be used to itemize funds in the fund balance for a specific purpose. There's not usually official action taken, and many times it's by the city manager can actually identify funds in the fund balance and assign them for a specific purpose. Again, it's much more fluid, it's more lenient. We can, if there's a necessary to be changed, we can kind of move those funds around for different purposes. And the final one is unassigned fund balance. Basically, it's everything that wasn't covered in any of the other categories. This is the money that the city has there with no identified purpose or tag or use tied to it currently. Forward. So the fund balance policy does state we keep an unrestricted fund balance equal to 26% of annual operating expenses. So all the money that we actually have direct control over can go into that 26% requirement. Council will very easily do an emergency ordinance and then free up any of the committed, and we can move around the assigned as well per direction. So it's why we try to keep the unrestricted fund balance at a certain level, because that's the one we can actually spend. Even in an emergency, we can't spend the restricted funds that the state's given us or the state mandates how we need to spend it. So even if we get to that point, those funds aren't actually available to us, even though we do have them in our bank account. The 26% is actually broken up into 2 sections, 1% for contingency and 25% in the event of a disaster. So the contingency would be only used by council action, so staff wouldn't be able to get into that. It'd be used for unexpected expenditures, and it'd be used at the onset of a recession to prevent fund balance from dipping below the 25%, sort of a little buffer. The other piece, the disaster piece, a declaration by the mayor of a disaster must be issued for the city to actually step in and tap into those funds. It would be used to provide for rescue operations or relief efforts, and it would be used to maintain city services during reconstruction if city revenues were significantly affected by the disaster. Staff would be able to operate with continuing our normal operations or levels of service while we hope that the city rebuilds back to its former state. Of course, if it doesn't and we have a lower revenue that's going to be there for a long time, staff would adjust its levels of service appropriately so we match our revenues to expenses at that time. Replenishment, if the unrestricted balance falls below the 26%, city manager will submit a plan to council to restore the fund balance to the target within 5 years. Usually the 1% shouldn't be too bad. If we go below the 25% during the national disaster, we will have to take steps to replenish that within 5 years. And that is the same part of the policy that was in the previous one. Staff was required by council, even in the existing policies, to replenish our fund balance to the target within 5 years. For the accumulation of fund balance over the 26%, council may authorize us to do so for irregular expenditures identified in a 5-year budget forecast, for capital improvement plans, but both accumulation purposes would be approved by council through the budget process. Otherwise, if the fund balance unexpectedly increased over the 25%, staff would be required to use those funds either to enhance services in some way or to reduce the tax rate, much like how we're proposing with our existing budget. And that is the summary of the updates on the changes to the policy, as well as some of the background on it. We timed this to be approved along with the budget, since it was the budget is anticipating some of these requirements to go into effect moving forward.
Thank you, sir. This is largely the manifestation of the work that we did in our last retreat on Friday, but there may be questions from council, so let me see if Mr. Crawford.
I thought that in the past we could take excess funds we had and either use them for the tax rate reduction, or apply them to the fund balance. Did we do that year before last, or is that what you're saying? We can't do anymore? We can't take excess funds throughout the year and add it to our fund balance if we want to do it to 27% or stay at 27% by change it legally?
So if we want to update the policy to require a 27%, we would have to do that.
Right.
So yes.
But we can't take money, if we have extra money, so to speak, in the budget next year, if we had $50,000 or $60,000 like we did 2 years ago, and we choose to put that in the fund balance, we can't do that anymore?
If council authorized the budget to actually put money back into the fund balance through the budget process, that money would be there. If we unexpectedly went over that in a year, we would try to find a use for it to enhance services or reduce it.
But if we didn't find a use, we could add it to the reserve fund. Is that correct?
The policy does allow for council to adjust and authorize accumulation over that.
Thanks.
Comment? Mr. Kessel?
I think the idea of enhancing the services could probably be best looked at over a 5-year window and thought of both as capital and operational in nature. So if there was an enhanced service we want to do in, say, year 4, you could save up money for that and go on a cash basis, pay-go basis. That would fit within that parameter. I think that we're probably thinking that we must spend it. This is not a proposal to do, use it or lose it. It's not that at all.
Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to approve 17M34?
So moved.
Got a motion from Mr. Edwards. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Crawford. Any other comments or questions from council? Or none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Thank you, sir. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening is Resolution 17R72. And it is a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement for EMS billing services with the City of Alamo Heights and other matters in connection therewith.
Mr. Mayor, Council.
Mr. Abbott, do tell. I mean, I know we do some stuff like this for neighboring cities, but Alamo Heights is well within Bexar County, so
Yeah.
what do we got going on?
So this is just actually a renewal agreement that we're asking for. It's for billing services throughout the city of Alamo Heights. So we've been doing it for the last 5 years.
Well, see how alert I am. Yeah.
We'd like to continue to do that.
I think it's great that we do work for other cities and earn money. Any questions for Mr. Mabbitt?
I do have one
Larson?
question.
Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Mabbitt, you said that there is a $21,000 annually is what we normally collect from this particular?
Yes.
How much are we expending to do so?
So it probably costs us about a quarter of an FTE. So $21,000 is about half of an FTE.
And for anyone that doesn't know, full-time equivalent. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think Mr. Kessel, you just pointed out to me that it's essentially a 9% return on our time and investment. Okay, Mr. Larson?
Make a motion to approve resolution number 17R72.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Larson, a second from Mr. Edwards. Other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries. Thank you, sir. We've already disposed of item number 8. Next item on the agenda this evening is item number 9, Resolution 17R76, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing agreements with the Texas Department of Public Safety and other matters in connection therewith. Chief, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mr. Kessel. This is a renewal of a program that provides surplus personal equipment from Department of Defense to law enforcement agencies. It's commonly referred to as a 1033 program. You've probably seen it in the news lately. This is the program that provided us the MRAP, among other things. That's the very large vehicle that we had available for high water events this last weekend.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Council, questions for Chief? Mr. Edwards?
Is this the program that President Trump just released back to the civil authority?
That's correct.
Good. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 17R76.
Second.
A motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Dr. Kaiser. Other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays. Motion carries. Thank you, Chief. All right, the next item number 10, and the item that follows that one, item number 11, and then again, item number 13 are all little gifts that we've received as a result of the actions of the state legislature. So I'm going to read this exceptionally long caption for item number 10 to lay this out. It's half a page. Ordinance 17D32, a public right-of-way management ordinance by the City of Schertz, Texas, regulating the physical use, occupancy, and maintenance of city rights-of-way by wireless network providers, describing the purpose, providing definitions, requiring compliance with a city design manual and applicable codes for the installation of network nodes and node support poles pursuant to Chapter 284 of the Texas Local Government Code, providing city procedures for applications for permits, establishing time periods for approval of permit applications, providing application fees and annual public right-of-way rental rates, providing restrictions on placement of network nodes and node support poles in municipal parks, residential areas, historic districts, and design districts, providing indemnity for the city, providing repealing and savings clauses, providing a Texas Open Meetings Act clause, declaring an emergency, and providing an effective date of September 1, 2017. So before I turn this over to you, Mr. Waite, the reason that we're having a single reading and declaring emergency on Ordinance 17D32 is because this legislature has made this particular provision effective on September 1.
Mr. Mayor, I think that should read "and transportation facilities pursuant to Chapter 284. That's what I have.
Yes. So I've got in front of me says, requiring compliance with the city design manual and applicable codes for the installation of network nodes and node support poles pursuant to Chapter 284 of the Texas Local Government Code. That's what I have printed before.
I got an arrow on mine that I have transportation facilities as well.
So there are 3 items. Transport facilities is the 3rd item that we're regulating.
So the caption is written wrong.
Indeed, there is a section that says after where it says support poles, it reads "and transport facilities pursuant to Chapter 284. So now that I've added that in, we've laid it out properly. Good catch. Thank you. Mr. Waite,
Yes,
good evening.
Thank you for the introduction of why we're here this evening. So there's been some changes in the wireless industry where they are using smaller technology to try to get closer to the people. So the city of Schertz for about a decade has had an ordinance in place that restricts cell phone towers. These are the ones, the monopole towers and the big towers with the big cell antennas on top of them. We restricted where those could be. And under that, we also restricted when the city was approached to place what we're calling these network nodes because they weren't a part of our ordinance. The legislature took action for every city during their legislative session and said that These are an important piece of our technology future, and so the cities have to allow them to be placed in the public right-of-way. They did lay out some restrictions on how they could be done and what cities could and could not do to restrict them. And so this, what you have here is a bunch of pictures showing some different things that are some of these small network nodes. The idea is in closer to large groups of citizens, they put these little small network nodes, and they're tied back to the cell tower, so that it's almost like a repeater system, so that the farther away you get from the tower, the less bandwidth, the less data you can transmit, and this is to get a greater data transmission to them. So we have three things we're talking about. The first is a wireless network node. That's one of those small little antenna things you saw on a few of those poles. The network node pole, if the city does not have a facility within the right-of-way that they could use, they can put their own pole in the right-of-way. And then the third is the transport facility. And the transport facility is a box that contains a bunch of electronics that, if they're farther away from a cell tower than what they'd like to be, and there's the presence of either cable or fiber internet to backhaul or to get the data directly to the internet, they can put a box in the right-of-way and connect it directly to the internet there in the right-of-way. Legislature did do some things in this ordinance, or in their legislation. Senate Bill 1004, they did restrict the size of what these devices could be. They restricted how tall the poles could be, and they restricted a whole bunch of other things against the wireless industry. They restricted against the city, basically saying if they meet all the requirements of the law, we have to allow them to put these things in the right-of-way. They did give us some exceptions to that, such as if it's in a historic area or a design district, if it's in a park, if they desire to place it in a park, I should say, or if they desire to place it within a residential area, there's some additional restrictions that we can put upon them in those. They laid out the application process we have to follow. They said we could have a design manual, which we have crafted from a template provided by the Texas Municipal League that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. And they said that we could establish fees. And so an ordinance 17D32 is called a right-of-way management ordinance. It outlines per Chapter 284 of the Texas Local Government Code what the city can and cannot do, and what an applicant for a network node has to do to be able to place their equipment within our public right-of-way. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
I suspect the council has some questions. I don't know that we're as up to speed on the action that the legislature took as much as the communications companies that actually wrote the law for the legislature. So questions for Mr. Waite. We'll start with Mr. Larson, work our way down.
Purely hypothetical, but what happens if we don't pass this ordinance?
Then they can place equipment wherever they want to within the right-of-way.
Okay, so this ordinance simply follows their guidelines while maximizing the city's rights according to the law.
Yes, it does.
So a protest vote against this would probably be not really protesting what they're doing at all. It would be hurting us more than helping us.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The law is very clear. If we pass nothing, then we cannot manage our right-of-way for these devices.
Mr. Gutierrez.
From what I could understand is each carrier going to have their own node?
So not only can carriers come in, but companies that work for carriers to put these devices up can also come in. We can't discriminate. We can't favor one over the other. If somebody comes in, they meet all the requirements, their application is complete, then they get to put devices within the right-of-way.
So placement of their nodes could be in the same place as somebody else's. In other words, Verizon and Sprint and Cricket can have their own node next to each other.
That is true. They could. They could also co-locate on the same pole together. They could co-locate on our poles. If depends upon where they want to place these devices.
Any idea what the minimum distance is between one node to the next within the same carrier?
I do not. I'm not that savvy on the technology. I do know they can be fairly close. There is restrictions in the law if they cause any radio interference with anything else, including, say, school district signs and things like that. I mean, not school district, but school zones and things like that. Some of the devices we have out there that we communicate with wirelessly, if it interferes with that, we can restrict them from being too close to that. There's also some language in the code regarding their ability to actually wire one network node on a pole to another network node on a pole with many nodes in between. So all of that is allowed underneath in Chapter 284.
Is the agreement going to be based with each carrier or the number of nodes that they have? Or are we going to restrict the number of nodes that they have?
So each device they want to install will have to go through an application process. Their application, they can apply for up to 30 devices at a time. There's varying fees based upon how many they're coming in to apply for. And then each one has to meet the requirements, and then it gets approved. And there's also another little caveat that y'all may enjoy in the law, that there's timelines on the city as to how quick we have to tell them whether their application is accurate or not. Those are very short, usually either 5 or 10 days. And then there's timelines on when we have to approve the application. If the city does not reject the application and we just fail to approve it, it is approved by law, and they can move forward installing their equipment.
Any idea what the proposed fee is for the?
Yes, sir. In the last ordinance number, we'll lay those out because we're putting them into the fee schedule. But the application fee is $500 for up to 5 nodes on an application, and $250 after that. There's also some right-of-way rental fees in there. If they want to put a pole up, that's $1,000 application fee. And then the transport facility application fees follow the network node fees. And then there's also a rental rate for the right-of-way from them of $28.
Thank you.
And if they use our pole, I skipped that one. If they use one of our poles, they have to pay us $20 a year for the use of our pole.
Mr. Crawford? No? Mr. Davis?
I was following this on TML. I'm just amazed that this is the mindset of our state coming down to the local level. I don't know, maybe since there are exceptions for historic areas, maybe we would sort of refer to ourselves as the historic city of Schertz and blanket coverage ourselves, but I know that's not going to be possible, and I know that would give fits to Mr. James, so I'll just let that one go. I'm good.
Mr. Edwards?
Who is setting the rate for $20 a year?
The state legislature did, sir.
Okay, so can you go back to and show me a couple of the pictures that you had up?
You bet.
Of the different. So I want to make sure these things have to be aesthetically pleasing to our community. Am I correct? Our design standard?
In our design manual, we are setting standards that we are going to ask them to meet, yes. That they should be somewhat aesthetically pleasing. So what we're trying to avoid is some of these pictures down here on the bottom. We've got a transport facility and a bunch of other electronics supporting the node on the pole, and we're looking more to go to something like this. This pole here, you can see the 2 small nodes on the side of the streetlight pole there. That is something more that we would be aiming for. We talked about, well, go ahead, sir. I know you want to say.
I was just going to caution, I'm not going to go into the detail. I just caution that these are not going to be pretty.
No.
There's not enough lipstick to put on the pig, as it were.
Okay.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Wade, earlier you mentioned that permit fees based up to 30 devices at a time.
On one application.
Is that a limit imposed by the state, a number imposed by the state? Do we have can we alter that?
No, that's a number that's proposed by them.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Kaiser?
Does this have anything to do with cable, or is it strictly wireless phone carriers?
It's strictly wireless phone, although they can interact with the cable network by using that as backhaul, or essentially their transport facility can plug into the cable network, but this doesn't apply to the cable. Anything having to do with cable television is covered under a different section of the code.
Thank you.
Mr. I'm just sitting quietly and contemplating the joyous nature of our current state legislature.
It's a preemptive mandate.
You know, the only we have to do this. We need to pass the ordinance. There's nothing that we can do that's going to undo what the state legislature did, other than elect different people to the next session and have it undone. Although the communications lobby is extraordinarily powerful. If there are no other comments or questions from council, is there a motion to approve ordinance 17D32?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the preemptive mandate ordinance number 17D32 by the state legislature.
Second. With the idea of preemptive.
We have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 17D32. Any other comments or questions from council? I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. It's a little bit out of order, but I would ask that on in a future meeting that we have, whether it be the next meeting or a meeting following, because I'm not going to put our city attorney on the spot this evening, but I'd really be interested in having a briefing from our city attorney, getting even perhaps a little bit deeper into this with some commentary, and frankly, anything that you and your colleagues and or TML see as unorthodox or unthought of or other ways that we can peaceably resist this wonderful new law from the state legislature. So if you just would prepare some comments for us for a future meeting, and what you guys might think, because if I remember reading the legislation correctly, there's only a few enforcement items there. I don't want to put you on the spot tonight, but if you have a comment you'd like to make, you're welcome to do so.
I have a lot of comments I would like to make.
Well,
but
me
I will
too.
save those. But I will tell you this, that not all cities are being peaceful about it. There's at least 2 lawsuits that have either been filed or going to be filed before September 1st. One is being spearheaded by McAllen, and it's challenging the constitutionality of the law, because what it's doing is what you're more familiar with is a franchise, and that's where you get to negotiate with a company for the use of your right-of-way, and you get to negotiate what that fee is. And so the state legislature has bypassed that authority that's given to you under the Constitution and dictated what you can charge for the use of your right-of-way. And so that lawsuit's been filed, and there's a number of cities that are with McAllen on that. And then the city of Austin, I believe, is the other city who's challenging this statute as being in violation of the Telecommunications Act, the Federal Telecommunications Act, that the state has preemptively passed legislation that's preempted by the Telecommunications Act. So we're monitoring those, but in the meantime, we're advising most of our cities that are interested to look at putting something on the books, because without anything, September 1, they're going to come in with a stack of permit applications, and us not having any way to really deal with those.
Right.
But I'd be happy to come up with a more detailed brief for a future meeting.
I'd love to have a more detailed brief and frankly updates on the lawsuits being started by other cities. And I heard, I won't call them out, but one of my colleagues asked if in our design requirements, if maybe there's something we could do that would require a shape that would tell the state legislature what we think about this. Open to all kinds of ideas. So look forward to the briefing and some commentary on this. All right, so that one's passed. We'll go now to item number 11, ordinance 17M33, an ordinance by the city of Schertz, Texas, approving a design manual for the installation of network nodes, node support poles, and transport facilities, and approving a pole attachment agreement regulating the installation of network nodes and transport facilities on city service poles and utility poles, declaring governing law, providing repealing and savings clauses, providing a Texas Open Meetings Act clause, declaring an emergency, and providing an effective date of September 1, 2017. Mr. Waite.
This is the next step. This ordinance does 2 things. It establishes the design manual and makes it a part of our ordinances, so that we can utilize that and the pieces in there that we've inserted. This design manual was crafted by some folks around the state at the request of TML. We've gone in there and added a few things for our community to try to make some effort to make it as aesthetically pleasing as possible. Added some things in there that are particular for our community, such as there's pieces in there that says they don't have to get an application to work on these if they don't shut down a street or a sidewalk. We've added recreational trail to that. as well, because the majority of poles we own are on Schertz Parkway. And so we've added some things like that to try to give a little more teeth to the design manual. The second thing that it also establishes is our use of a pole attachment agreement. So if they would like to co-locate on one of our poles as opposed to putting up their own pole, and that's really what we want to try to encourage them to do, so that we don't have a proliferation of poles up and down Schertz Parkway, it's an agreement that spells out what they have to do to our pole, what kind of studies they have to give us and things like that to make sure the equipment they're going to hang on our pole, the pole can handle, lines out what happens if that pole is damaged, if their equipment causes problems, and all that's outlined in that agreement. So it establishes both of those as a piece of our process in approving the placement of these devices in the right-of-way.
All right. From a high level, and I apologize, I read the first iteration of this thing and not the one that was amended in the House and finally made it out. From a high level, what restrictions are placed on us with regard to the development of our design manual? I mean, I'm sure we couldn't create something that was so onerous that they couldn't construct it.
No. There's some, basically what's on us, hello, I had a friend. What's on us is making sure that their application they turn in fits within the guidelines of the law, and that dictates the size of the equipment, how high the equipment can be on a pole, how tall their poles can be, and how much stuff they can have on the ground next to it. We've added some things in there about using words like aesthetically pleasing and things like that. We've added in some of the things I've talked to you about when they do and do not have to pull a permit to work on their equipment. The design manual is really crafted straight off of the law. We went through it and tried to add a few things, tried to make it applicable to, do we have a design district? Does something like Crossvine or some of other PDDs, does that apply to them with the use of decorative poles and things like that? We went in and made sure we had in there the restrictions of placing them in parks. And the restrictions of placing them alongside residential neighborhoods. They can't put them on a street that has less than a 50-foot right-of-way. So that protects our normal, a lot of our residential streets. So we made sure all of that was included in there.
But not our parkway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another question for you. I believe that we were restricted in making requirements with regard to the makeup of the materials.
As far as?
We can't tell them that it has to be made out of concrete. We can't tell them it has to be made out of plastic, or it has to be made out of metal.
Some of that was in our design manual, wasn't it, sir?
So the state standard, as I understand it, and I'm going to look over at Dan and see if he's nodding yes or no, basically prohibits us from having standards that could be interpreted as discriminatory between other utilities within the right-of-way. So whatever we can in good conscience say we would do for all utilities, including our own utilities, including GVC, including other utilities that are already there, then that would be something that we could do. And so we can't have a different standard, as I understand the law, that would be a higher standard, with certain exceptions in these design districts and so on. We've certainly encouraged within that certain parameters, and we're going to certainly want to look back at our right-of-way manual and see if there's other things that we can require of all parties. And we have some things, for example, that we have the metal pole standard currently as opposed to a wood pole. That would be an example where you would say, yes, that's a standard that we all that's equally applied. It's not singling out this particular industry. And so I think part of it is making sure we have this on the books, and part of it is saying, how can we play nice with these companies for those that are willing to, and they may voluntarily come and do the things that we've put as our preferences within the design manual as well. And hopefully, we'll be able to spend more time than we have been since this summer to really get ourselves in good shape.
Okay, and I apologize for kind of monopolizing for a few minutes, but Mr. Santee, talking about specific design standards and whether or not they would move away from the guidance given in the legislation and the consequences of doing so, are those still within the parameters in view of the Texas Open Meetings Act for the discussion here at this time?
Yeah, and I think what's before you is the adoption of a design manual. So anything related to what that would be, or what if you have suggestions that possible changes within that manual, I think that's.
Yeah. So my question then is, if we were to adopt a design feature requirement that was in fact potentially viewed by someone as overtly discriminatory, what are the consequences? Is that something where the communications folks that are trying to get permits to do these would have to take us to court? Where do they go with a complaint for us failing to, in their opinion and their attorney's opinion, complying with the provisions of the law?
So yes, I think that would be the simplest explanation, was they would have to challenge that law. So if you feel like a law has been adopted that is not in compliance with the statutory requirements, you would have to challenge that, be set aside. Now, there's risk with that, of course.
There are.
But yeah, I will tell you this, that before this legislation was passed, I was dealing with one of these companies in another location, and before this was ever passed, and they moved on to lower hanging fruit because of the provisions that were put in place, and I guess the resistance that was put in front of them in order to locate in that city. They did move on to another city. Now they'll be back, but so I think just by adopting a design manual and adopting regulations, that alone in and of itself, before you do anything else, is going to assist Schertz, because not everybody is doing this. Not every city around you is taking these measures alone. So I would caution against going too far outside of what's authorized. However, yeah, I mean, the state already allows for differences in certain districts. And so I think if your focus is tied to distinguishing different areas of your city and design standards within those areas, there's a lot more flexibility there than just an across-the-board, this is the design we want, if that makes sense. So.
It does make sense. And so while it is slightly out of order and without the objection of counsel, I would like to ask that we have, if you find it appropriate and would deem it so, an executive session scheduled for our next available meeting for advice from our attorney to continue to delve into the risks that you see, what would be appropriate, inappropriate, et cetera. I think some of that discussion probably doesn't need to be an open session. Some of it we're going to do now, but would that be appropriate?
Yeah, we can do that. And the other thing I would say too, Mayor and Council, is that we adopt this. If we adopt something tonight, we can amend it the next meeting if we want to amend it, or the meeting after that, or whatever. And the discussion we had with staff when we met on this was, look, our priority is having something that regulates this. And then as we start to see the volume of permits that come in and see the challenges and kind of the pushback we get on certain areas, we're going to be better equipped to see where we can make amendments one way or the other on this. So, yeah, I think this is something we should approach in that fashion.
Okay. All right. And then it may be appropriate for a future discussion, perhaps an executive session, is it 5 to 10 days? What's the requirement once a permit is brought before us that we have to approve it, or it's deemed approved?
No, it's so depending on which of the three devices they want to install, we have either up between 5 and 10 days of saying the application is complete. And then for, I believe it's the poll, we have up to 180 days to approve the application. So there's time there to do that. One of the things that we're aware of is that between the time the legislation was passed and now, we've been approached by a company who wants to turn in 3 different sites in town. just on their original map. We've told them no. They actually want to come in early, pay us more money than the law allows, and try to get some preferential location. And we said, wait until September 1st.
Yeah.
That's the only three we've been approached by, compared to a rather larger neighboring city that we've been told has 300 applications pending turning in Friday on September 1st. So
Interesting. I don't want to get ahead of what we might discuss in executive session, but I also am thinking that if would like to explore whether or not it would be appropriate for a committee of the city council to act as a design review board as a potential adjunct to what we're doing here, where we would hear from an applicant and they would have to appear before us. Something to think about and look into if we could. I'm going to stop now because I've run my mouth enough, and usually I defer to council first, but let me allow council to ask questions. So who'd like to start us off?
I just have a
Gutierrez?
question. Maybe it's a legal question here, but if we do approve the design and the application is submitted, then it must follow the design that we approved today and not amend it later. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Very good. Mr. Davis?
You mentioned we had somebody with proposed 3 locations already.
yes, sir. Single company, 3 different locations.
Did those proposed locations conflict with what we're proposing in our design guide, or were they sort of in agreement with what we're looking at with the design guide right now?
We didn't get anything other than a map with like a circle as their preferred locations.
Okay.
So we didn't get an application. We don't know exactly what their equipment's going to look like. We don't know how much they're going to hang on a pole. And it did not include, one of them was on the Parkway, and it did not include whether or not they wanted to use one of our poles on the Parkway or if they would be installing their own pole on the Parkway.
Thank you.
Mr. Edwards?
You know, maybe this is an opportunity for us to explore an arts program as well. And the reason why I say this, we could put this into maybe one of the schools. We have the arts program where they come in every year and to do the arts program. Maybe we can do that. Maybe we can put it through the YMCA arts program and have them do a design, or maybe write into our design manual that each one of the casings be painted by the children of the community. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that. We control our own community. I think this would be something that we can put the handprints that we did at the YMCA on the Aquatic Center I think those are the types of things that sets the community apart. And if we put that on them, they'll see just how much we care about our community as well. I think that's something we ought to consider tonight. Before we set another standard, let's consider it tonight. Because this company already has 3 applications on file, right?
Well, they're not yet. We're not accepting applications.
They're trying to. Okay.
We're telling them no.
Well, but reality is, why not set our own signature to it? We were talking about, showing them how much we care about our community by laughing about No Name Park. Let's show them how much we really care about these potentially monstrous things they're going to put on our poles. So I just think we ought to consider that.
Mr. Kessel?
Just one thing to keep in mind is that whatever standard we would set, we want to do that for any other utility. So it would be every utility that we would have the same standard, because we want to apply it in a non-discriminatory fashion.
Mr. Thompson?
I have 3 questions. I think I already know the answer to the first based on what Mr. Kessel said. Would it be discriminatory, i.e. a different standard, if we would require a time limit as to when we could restrict when the node support poles could be installed or worked on, say, midnight to 5 a.m., so that it minimally impacts our residents and traffic? That's first of 3 questions. Second question, you said it's as quote-unquote aesthetically pleasing. By whose definition or standard? The utility companies? Ours? The communities? Or is it just vaguely stated that way?
Well, it has to do with what we require them to turn in at the time, as far as what it's going to look like. We also talked in there, we added language in there about using concealment techniques or camouflage techniques as well. So one of the pictures I had at the start of this, I believe, I may have covered it up with another one, but it showed a pole that you really couldn't tell had nodes on the side of it because they were the same color as the pole. They were a little taller and thinner, but then they brought them in right up against the side of the pole. So when you looked up the pole, it looks like it had a little burp on the side of it, and then that was it. So it was not what you were seeing in some of the other pictures.
That would be nice. Third question. In light of the time period from when the company puts in their application that we have to approve it, this is kind of a multi-part question. What's the impact in light of the current local workload of our permits inspection staff? And if we are required to approve this within a certain time, does that mean we're actually showing discrimination towards these companies in the sense that it's a positive discrimination? We're actually saying, now we have to prefer you, we have to promote you first in line over anybody else who's already in the pipeline. Is that not discriminatory towards our current?
There's two time frames. One is the short time frame is the application complete or not? And what makes it complete is spelled out in the state law and in the design ordinance. So it's basically somebody going down a checklist and saying, yes, it's there. That's the short time. After that, we have anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending upon what, or maybe I think it's 3 to 6 months, depending upon what it is they're wanting to get a permit to install to approve the permit. The permits will be done through Public Works. They permit the right-of-way work, whether it's fiber optic or gas lines or whatever else. With that kind of time frame, I don't know, we might be hard-pressed to say that workload's going to be, well, we don't know yet, right? We know of 3 just because they tried to get in early. And we've been told San Antonio's going to see 300. So we don't know what that workload's necessarily going to be come Friday at 8 a.m.
So again, the aesthetically pleasing, that's our community standard that we set.
I'm super hesitant to have us say the words aesthetically pleasing anymore. I don't believe that they're going to be aesthetically pleasing. I think that they can be less unpleasing. And I think if we can camouflage them or cloak them or have them concealed in some way, that you certainly will have the chance of not noticing them, which is different than being aesthetically pleasing. And I'm not trying to be clever about the language. I'm trying to be very direct on what the ordinance will accomplish.
Yeah, and so we meet next Tuesday, do we not?
Yes.
Yeah, we meet next Tuesday. And so any applications that are filed Friday are essentially only governed by what we pass this evening. Any changes that we might make in the future would not cover any of those. And we have no idea how many we're going to get on Friday.
Exactly.
Then I'll turn over to Mr. Larson. Do you have a picture of that one that you described that was minimally invasive?
Let's see if it's on there.
Or if not, maybe you can show one by next week?
Yeah, I can bring you some more, or we can send them out to you and let you see some other pictures.
Very good.
Dudley, I can send you some engineered drawings that I have that I received from another city of their pole.
Be good. Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to try to craft one if you guys would just bear with me. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve ordinance 1733 with the exception, with the inclusion of maybe in school or a YMCA art program by students for the design, or at least for the coverage of the aesthetics in our city on these poles.
Turn on your microphone if you would.
I'm sorry.
And let everybody hear your comments.
We would have to include all utilities in that, or else, by what I understand, Mr. Kessel was saying that we would be discriminatory and hence be held liable.
Or is it discriminatory to the other wireless? So if we put it on all wireless providers?
I have not looked in depth in that, but that provision does exist that you can't treat them differently. The one concern I would have is that we already have existing franchise agreements in place, I think, with your other providers. So without reviewing what those franchise agreements would allow us to additionally place on them as far as requirements.
But those are hidden. They're up on water towers, and those are not.
Well, but they also,
in plain
some of
sight.
them would likely, well, but I would assume that your electric provider has cabinets some at various places in their right of way.
Yeah.
That's pretty common. So it would just be something I would want to look at.
I like the effort at being in the way of these folks coming to us. See, the challenge is you have to think carefully about what we say here on the dais, because we do record this, and therefore anything that we say, any of those companies out there could say, well, did you watch this? Here's what they really meant and thought, which is why I think that we probably should consult with our attorney next Tuesday in a closed session. I don't know. Do you want to?
Mr. Mayor, I'll rescind my motion, and I'd like to make a motion that we approve ordinance 17M33 as stated.
Second.
With possible changes in the future.
I have a second motion from Mr. Edwards. I have a second from Mr. Crawford. Other comments, thoughts from council? Mr. Larson?
Well, this is kind of a backwards question, so don't judge me for it. But do we have to charge the fee as stated, or could we charge a lower fee if they place it in a more advantageous location for us? So could we say it's the state mandated fee if you put it wherever you want, if you just draw a big circle on a map, but if you utilize these particular locations, it's at a discounted rate?
I believe our attorney would have to weigh in on that. I believe that may be showing favoritism, which is also not allowed underneath the.
Yeah, can that be part of our conversation in executive session?
Absolutely.
You know, what's really sad is that this piece of legislation did not come to the city gift wrapped at all. It was just a brown bag with an amount of some excrement in it. They could have gift wrapped it. They could have put a nice bow on it, and they could have done something to conceal the smell, but they did not. So I do have a motion and a second to approve 17M33. Any other comments or questions from council?
So, Mr. Mayor,
Mr.
I want
Edwards.
to make sure we have this correct. You're going to come back to us next week with an amended ordinance or something that shows us what we could possibly do to pass on the dais that week.
Discussion of possibilities in executive session, and we'll have this potentially as a discussion and/or action item following the executive session.
Yes.
That work?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
So again, we're a little bit out of order, but the discussion here is, I do have a motion and a second on the floor. I have a request, unless council objects, to place on our agenda for next week consultation with our attorney in executive session and consideration and/or action approving or amending ordinance 17M33 somewhere on the agenda. That way, if after consultation with our attorney we deem that we would like to revisit this, it is on the agenda where we would be able to revisit this. Okay. Mr. Thompson?
One question on that. Company A, B, and C put their permits in Monday. We meet on Tuesday. We have 5 days to, say 5 to 10 days to notify them of the completeness of their application. Would whatever standards or designs this draft imposes, would those companies be grandfathered in to meet these standards regardless of what other standards we might impose, or would they have to wait until after their application is complete?
You want to give the short answer?
The short answer is they will go into whatever you adopt tonight.
Tonight. Yeah. Yep. So again, I have a motion and a second. Other comments or questions from council? If not, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 I have 6 ayes and no nays. The motion carries. We'll go on now to one that's not directly related to any special help from the state legislature, but is interesting in its own right. So item number 12, Resolution 17R77, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Green Valley Special Utility District and Triple H Development, LLC, for the exchange of certificate of convenience and necessity related to the development of Halley Cove. Mr. Waits.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So, and we've done a few of these before in the past. So, as a city, our city limits, as we've annexed territory, has taken an area that not all of it is within our CCN and or our Certificate of Convenience and Necessity for either drinking water or wastewater services. What that CCN allows us to do is to provide those services to the folks in an area. So we've been working for a while on a few of these different agreements. This one came in, Halley's Cove by Triple H Development came in, and as you can see on the map, the outline of the development, you can see where the CCN kind of splits the development off. The issue with this is that what would end up happening if we didn't reach an agreement with Green Valley and swap this CCN is that you could have folks in the front of the subdivision getting water from us, folks in the back of the subdivision getting water from Green Valley. My belief is the water is different in taste, but it also comes at a different cost to the end consumer. And so you could have somebody with a real high water bill in the back of the development and somebody with a lower water bill in the front. So what the developer has done is reached out to Green Valley and asked them to agree to swap the area you see in the hatches inside the black box with the city of Schertz, and to allow the Public Utility Commission to move that into our CCN so this development will be 100% within our CCN. Green Valley has agreed to that, and we just need City Council's approval so that the developer can take this to the PUC and make the magic happen with them.
Thank you, Mr. Waite. Questions for Mr. Waite? Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Wait.
Yes, sir.
Didn't I read in the packet that there's basically no charge for the city to make this change?
That is correct. There's a whole bunch of state law about exchanging CCN, but if the two parties come together and agree, then there doesn't necessarily have to be any reimbursement to one party or the other as far as their infrastructure that may or may not have any value anymore. And so Green Valley has agreed, as this agreement says, and by council's approval, we will agree that there'll be no exchange of anything between the two parties.
So we don't trade any area anyplace else. This is just a kind of a gentleman's agreement.
Yes, sir.
The city provides the water to the residents, and it's all Schertz. And they didn't ask for anything later, but we'll try to work with them, I guess, if nothing happens.
No, sir.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Waite? Comments from council? If not, is there a motion to approve 17R77?
So move.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Gutierrez. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is item number 13, Ordinance 17M35, an ordinance by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, amending the City of Schertz Code of Ordinances by establishing fees for wireless network nodes, node support poles, and transport facilities desiring to be placed in the public right-of-way, declaring an emergency and providing an effective date of September 1, 2017. Once again, thank you to the state legislature. Mr. Waite.
Yes, sir. So we're adding these to the fee schedule so they're with the rest of the fees that the city has. The fees spelled out by the legislation that we're asking council to adopt for the network nodes themselves is an application fee of $500 for up to 5 on the same application. Anyone on that same application after that would be an additional $250 per each node that they want to place. And then the annual public right-of-way fee for the nodes is $250 a year that the city will have them pay us. That, of all the fees I'm going to talk about, that is the one that we can adjust going forward by 1/2 of the urban consumer CPI annually. And so that, as the cost goes up, as the cost of living goes up, we can charge more. All the rest of these fees are set in statute at the state level. The application fee, if they want to put their own pole up, the application fee for that is $1,000. And then the rental for using the right-of-way is covered by placing the nodes. It's at $250 per node. And then the co-location fee for use of the city pole, which just was a small victory in the legislative battle, although the money looks very small, the idea is to provide a financial incentive to have them place their equipment on a pole that already exists. And so if they desire to do that and they meet our requirements, then it's a $20 annual fee for them to hang their equipment on our pole. And then lastly, the transport facilities, if they want to put those on, the application fee are the same as the network node application fees. And then the rental fee per device per month is $28.
All right. Questions for Mr. Waite? Mr. Larson, please.
This is probably a silly question as well, but if they can do, so their one application can have up to 30 devices, and the first 5, the fee is $500, and any after that is $250. Is that like a lifetime count, or can they just do 2 different applications and pay $500
They
for
could
5?
do 2 different applications and go through the process again. Different cities are doing that in a different way, in different ways, as well as, saying it's $100 per node or whatever that is. So part of that is it gives us, going forward, if the application has more than 5 in the amount of time, there's an additional workload to try to get that. So, honestly, probably the additional incentive is if they're going to do more than 7, then come back with a second application. And then, that gives us a whole new timeline to work on that one.
Okay, so it's preferable for the city for them to do multiple applications as opposed to one
There's
large.
some separation in there.
Okay.
I mean, until we heard what San Antonio was expecting on day one, we weren't thinking about large numbers coming in the door on day one. We'd been approached by that single company with 3 different sites that they want to use. And so right now, I'm not sure if we're really aware how this is going to benefit us one way or the other until we get some of those applications in and start the process.
Understood.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve ordinance 17M35.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Thompson. Other comments and questions from council? Mr. Davis?
Yeah, one quick question. The annual public right-of-way fee, is that per network node, or is that the company pays one $250 fee for right-of-way access across the city each year?
That's per network node.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I'm debating on whether or not to make a comment, and I may allow self-control to get the better of me. I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays, the motion carries. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening is a roll call vote confirmation. Ms. Schmeckel?
On the first workshop, there was no action taken. On the second workshop, motion was made by Councilmember Thompson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. And this is to ask the Parks and Recreation Board to open a 60-day window to ask for public input on considering the naming of the no-name park for another name. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Thompson, and Kaiser and Crawford voted yes. Councilmember Larson voted no. Motion passed. Consent items, number 1, 2, and 3. Motion was made by Councilmember Thompson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 4, ordinance number 17T30, first reading. Motion was made by Councilmember Thompson, seconded by Councilmember Crawford. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 5, ordinance number 17T31, first reading. Motion was made by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 6, ordinance number 17M34, first reading. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Crawford. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 7, resolution number 17R72. Motion was made by Councilmember Larson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 8, resolution number 17R74. Motion was made by Councilmember Thompson, seconded by Councilmember Kaiser. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 9, resolution number 17R76. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Kaiser. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 10, ordinance number 17D32, first and final reading. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Thompson. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 11, ordinance number 17M33, first and final reading. A motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Crawford. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 12, resolution number 17R77. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed. Item number 13, ordinance number 17M35, first and final reading. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Thompson. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Motion passed.
Any questions, council?
I'm sorry?
I was asking the council if there are any questions of what you read forth. All good? Okay. There was a lot of them. All right. So next item that we have on the agenda this evening is announcements by the city manager. Mr. Kessel says he doesn't have anything this evening. The item following that is placing items on a future agenda. Are there any items that we need placed on an agenda in the future that we don't currently have set forth?
I have something, sir.
Very good. Mr. Edwards?
There was a gentleman that came in, Mr. John Chalker. He offered a brush area. He wanted an area to do brush pickup. I wanted to get an update on where we are on that issue. Several other items that I wanted to get updates on, the completion of the skate park or maybe the next phase, the city sign out front of City Hall, That's still not functioning from what I saw. The projectors in here, I thought that we were told they were going to be ready in the next couple of weeks. So I don't know when that's going to happen. And we may want to discuss TML in Houston, since what they're going through and what FEMA is saying about being prepared to be out of their homes until after October.
Yeah. I'm going to let Mr. Kessel, while we remain within the realm of facts and other things.
Just on the second to last item, the projectors, it's my understanding they'll be installed after this meeting and before the next meeting. And I can't see the folks around the corner, but I'm getting a yes, okay. So that should be done.
All right. Did you capture everything that Mr. Edwards had? Anyone else? Mr. Thompson?
Yes, earlier when we were talking the JLU study, we had said that there would be meetings with landowners in South Schertz and any recommendations coming out of those. Just wondering what the progress or result of those meetings are at this point.
Very good. Mr. Davis?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. James has been eerily quiet tonight, so I'm just going to give him more things for his plate. I know he appreciates that. To me, the aesthetics of our city are really important, and that came up tonight in our discussions on these cell nodes and its potential impact. As we've been growing, right now we've got a Main Street committee that's talking about Main Street, and we're probably turning the corner into the final stretch before we come back with a recommendation to the council. And over the past couple of years, we've had a couple of different improvements to the city with regards to aesthetics that have come about in a couple different ways. For example, we now have the Veterans Plaza that was done by a committee and turned over to the city. We had a mural done on the side of the old hardware building on Main Street that I believe was sort of rooted in the Historical Preservation Committee. And then we had a mural done down at Pickerel Park Pool, which came out of the Parks Foundation side of the house. So what I'd like to see coming on a future agenda, and this is nowhere near anytime soon, but I'd like to get it on the radar now, is two things. One, the development of some kind of committee or some kind of process that would address artwork in our community, whether that's some options of whether that it comes before the city council, or whether that utilizes an existing committee that's already out there, or whether it includes the creation of a new committee or arts council that would look and vet art projects, be responsible for cataloging what we currently have, and addressing their continued maintenance, and reviewing and recommending future artworks or pieces of art throughout the community. And then the second piece of that would be some kind of vehicle or mechanism to fund potential artworks along the lines with what the city of San Antonio does with their 1% withhold that they do on capital improvement projects that helps fund art projects throughout various portions of the city that would help improve our aesthetics and help make us the number one community in the Northeast that we are.
Very good. Anyone else? My compliments, Mr. Davis. That is a great next step, and I would love to see it, I don't know, next 30 days or so, sooner than later. It's a great next step for us. Next thing we have on the agenda this evening, announcements by the mayor and council members, and I'll go first to Mayor Pro Tem, reading all those captions. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards.
Just a couple of things. I had an opportunity to travel up to New York to West Point to see my son get his class ring and witness ring poop, which is really interesting. Second thing was the day prior to us leaving, we went over to Misty Woods to the GN Homes grand opening, and wow, what a beautiful property. Great turnout, even though we started to get a lot of heavy rain, but it was a great turnout still.
Very good. Mr. Crawford? Nothing this evening, Mr. Davis?
Nothing, sir.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Hold on. This past Friday, I had the opportunity to attend a city staff meeting to prepare for Hurricane Harvey. I just want to commend the city staff for preparing for the hurricane. And although Schertz did not receive the full force of what was expected, it was very assuring that our staff was ready for the worst. Thank you all. The other thing I want to mention is I also want to thank our citizens of Schertz who opened their doors to house family and or friends of those cities that were affected by the hurricane.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larson? Mr. Thompson?
Two things. Number one, I would like to extend congratulations to Mr. Kessel and Public Works and all their employees beginning the desilting process of our main drainage canal in Live Oak this current year and continuing the funding to do so in next fiscal year in light of Harvey. It just shows we can use all the capacity we can have when something hits us. And the second thing is Harvey related. Mr. Kessel earlier mentioned that we have 22 of our employees serving down the Houston area. I'd like to commend not only those, but to all who remain behind, covering shifts and doing extra duties, etc., so that those 22, it's truly a team effort. They may be the highlighted ones, but there's people back here making sacrifices for them as well.
That's well put. Dr. Kaiser?
Just to echo some of the things on the Hurricane Harvey, I do agree that the deployment of our first responders, I think, is great. And I know that's really appreciated by anyone affected by that. And I would encourage people, if you really want to help, we can't all leave and go and help somewhere. But I know the Red Cross is asking for donations, monetary and other items.
Absolutely, and I will follow on a little bit as well. We did stand up our Emergency Operations Center as the hurricane approached. That's something we've done only a few times. When I first started on council 10 years ago, we had an emergency operations procedure. It has become just more and more refined as we've gone along, and what we believe we have gotten to a place of is capability that we just didn't have 10 years ago. We built on what we had, which was good, and we learned a lot in the flood of '98, and we've just continued to apply those lessons. And when we stood up our Emergency Operations Center, it was a very smooth operation and really put us in a position to deal with what might have been had Harvey not stopped 50 miles from our front door. The other thing I would say, too, about those staff members that are serving with other first responders around the state and toward the coast, you know, one of the advantages that we get from this is not so much, and not to discount it at all, helping in the overall effort, but our people get real life, on the job disaster and search and rescue experience, such that should anything like that ever come to the city of Schertz, they've been there and done that and are prepared to do that for our residents. That's a fantastic thing that they bring back from going out and helping our fellow communities throughout the state. So with that said, if there's anything else from council or from staff, and if there's not, then we stand adjourned.